The first time Claire saw the Titanic, she thought it looked like a sleeping giant. She'd been preparing for this expedition for years. Diving to the wreck had been her dream since childhood. Her grandfather had been a Titanic historian, and she'd grown up hearing stories about the ship, the passengers, the tragedy that claimed over 1,500 lives. But nothing could have prepared her for seeing the ghostly hulk in person through the submersible's porthole. The beams from their lights cut through the pitch-black water, revealing the ship's bow, resting silently at the bottom of the Atlantic. Its once proud shape was now twisted and broken, carpeted with rustic lace that hung like wet stalactites. Claire's heart ached at the sight. This was where so many people had spent their last moments. And yet, there was no sign of them. No bones. No skeletons. Nothing but scattered shoes, jewelry, and luggage. That had always bothered her. Where were the people? "Breathtaking, isn't it?" said Alan, her dive partner, from the other seat of the submersible. His voice crackled over the headset. "Yeah," Claire said softly. "Almost feels like it's watching us." Alan chuckled. "You sound like my wife. She says this place is haunted." Claire didn't laugh. She wasn't sure why, but the moment he said it, she felt something shift, like the dark water outside had just grown thicker, heavier. Back on the research vessel, Claire couldn't stop thinking about it. She stood on the deck as night fell, the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. The air was damp and cold, the smell of salt clinging to everything. She should have felt exhilarated. This was her dream, but there was something under her skin she couldn't shake. Something about the wreck had felt wrong. During the dive, she had seen something strange on the camera feed. A shadow moving along the promenade deck. She'd told herself it was just silt disturbed by their lights, but part of her wasn't convinced. Later that night, Claire lay awake in her bunk, listening to the creak of the ship as it rocked on the waves. Somewhere above deck, something heavy shifted, a thud that echoed down through the hull. Then came another sound. A faint, distant tapping. Like knuckles on metal. Tap, tap, tap. She sat up, heart hammering. The sound stopped. Alan, in the bunk across from her, stirred. "You hear that?" he mumbled, half asleep. Claire nodded, even though he couldn't see her in the dark. But by morning, when she brought it up over breakfast, Alan shrugged it off. "Probably the anchor chain," he said. "You're spooking yourself." Maybe he was right. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about those scattered shoes and suitcases. It was as if the ocean had swallowed every trace of flesh and bone, and left only objects behind. But why? And why did she feel, deep in her gut, that something down there was still waiting for them? The next dive began at dawn. Claire sat strapped in the submersible again, staring out the porthole as the ocean swallowed them whole. The light faded from blue to black as they sank. Alan hummed softly to himself, his hands steady on the controls. "Today we map the starboard deck. We'll try to get into the Marconi room if the hatch isn't blocked." Claire nodded distractedly. The night's strange tapping still haunted her. She had tried to convince herself it was just the anchor chain or something shifting on the boat. But in her dreams, she'd seen pale hands knocking on the hull, trying to get in. The pressure gauge ticked higher as they descended. Claire's ears popped. Then came the whisper. At first, she thought it was just static in the headset, but it almost sounded like a voice. Muffled. Guttural. "Not Alan. Did you say something?" Claire asked. Alan glanced at her. "No." "Why?" "Nothing," she said quickly, though her pulse spiked. The Titanic loomed out of the darkness again, impossibly huge, impossibly silent. The submersible's light swept across the deck, over rusted railings and open doorways that yawned like black mouth. Alan guided them closer. "We're almost at the Marconi room. The radio equipment should still be there. Well, what's left of it." But Claire wasn't listening. Her eyes locked on a figure standing near the grand staircase. It was there for only a second, a silhouette, pale and thin, motionless in the beam of the light. Then it was gone. She gasped. "What?" Alan asked sharply. Someone was there, she said, pointing frantically. I saw. Alan turned the sub, sweeping the lights back over the spot. There was nothing. Just silt and collapsed railing. Alan frowned. You need sleep, Claire. Nobody's down here but us. Claire bit her lip but said nothing. But she knew what she saw. Back on the research vessel, the atmosphere had shifted. One of the techs, Jonas, was pale as a sheet. The sonar's acting weird, he muttered, pointing at the screen. It keeps picking up. I don't know. Something that's moving. Moving? Alan frowned. Like a shark. Jonas shook his head. No. It's too big. And it's not fish shape. It just appears. Then disappears. Claire felt a chill run through her. That night, the tapping returned, louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it wasn't just Claire who heard it. Several of the crew came out onto the deck, shining flashlights into the misty darkness. There was nothing there. But the sound continued, from underneath the ship. Almost like someone was knocking on the hull. Someone's screwing with us, Jonas said nervously. Right. Nobody answered. Claire leaned over the railing, staring down at the black water. For a split second she saw a pale face looking up at her from the depths, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Then it vanished, leaving only ripples. By the third night, Claire was starting to unravel. She hadn't slept more than a few hours. She kept seeing things, pale hands pressed against the portholes, faces drifting just out of sight. Alan confronted her in the galley. You need to get a grip. We can't afford to lose focus down here. You didn't see them, she said. They're down there, Alan. The people who died. They're still there. Alan's expression hardened. That's impossible. You know what the ocean does to bodies. They'd be gone. Exactly, Claire hissed. So why are there shoes? Why are there clothes, luggage, everything but bones? Where did they go? Alan had no answer. But that night, he heard the tapping too. And when he looked overboard, he swore he saw a hand reach up out of the wave. By morning, half the crew wanted to leave. The radios were picking up static-filled transmissions, faint, desperate Morse code messages from nowhere. SOS. SOS. Claire recognized the sequence. It was the same distress call Titanic sent before she sank. The text confirmed it. The signal was coming from the direction of the wreck. But that was impossible. The radio equipment had been dead for over a century. Claire's hands shook as she traced the dots and dashes in her notebook. It wasn't just SOS. There was something else in the message. Come down. The storm rolled in just before their final dive. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and the ocean turned black as ink. Rain lashed the deck, soaking the crew as they strapped Claire and Alan into the submersible. This is insane, Jonas said, shaking his head. We should wait for the weather to clear. Alan's jaw was set. If we leave now, we lose the signal. Whatever's broadcasting down there, it's getting weaker. Claire said nothing. Her stomach churned with dread, but she couldn't stop herself. Something down there wanted them. No, needed them. As the sub descended, lightning flashed above, briefly illuminating the boiling surface before it disappeared. Then came only blackness. The further they went, the quieter the world became, until all that was left was the hum of the engines and the rasp of their breathing. The Titanic emerged from the darkness like a corpse. But this time, it felt different. The ship wasn't just a wreck, it felt awake. Its gaping windows seemed to watch them as they approached the deck. The radio crackled suddenly. Down. Claire flinched. Did you hear that? Alan swallowed. Yeah. The signal strengthened the deeper they went, guiding them toward the Marconi room. Claire gripped the edge of her seat as Alan maneuvered the submersible closer to a jagged opening in the deck. We're going inside? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. We have to, Alan said. The signal's coming from in there. The sub's lights illuminated the Marconi room. The radio equipment was rusted, encrusted with barnacles, yet the dials were moving. The needles twitched, as if receiving a signal. That's not possible, Alan muttered. Claire's eyes widened. Then she saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, floating just beyond the edge of the light. Men in tattered tuxedos, women in torn dresses, children clutching toys, their faces pale and bloated, their empty eyes locked on the submersible. They weren't drifting aimlessly. They were watching. Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Alan, we have to go." But before he could reply, the sub lurched violently. Something had grabbed it. Through the porthole, a face appeared. A man's face, pale, half-decayed, but unmistakably human. His lips moved soundlessly. Claire could read them. "Come down." With a deafening groan, the floor of the Marconi room collapsed, revealing a dark void beneath the wreck. Alan cursed, trying to pull the sub free, but the figures surged closer. Hands, pale, skeletal hands, pressed against the glass, leaving trails of seaweed and silt. Claire screamed as the sub was yanked downward into the opening. Everything went black. When the lights came back on, they were somewhere else. Not inside the wreck. Not exactly. It looked like a ballroom, impossibly preserved. Chandeliers glimmered overhead. The floor was intact, polished and gleaming. And the room was full. Hundreds of passengers stood in perfect silence, facing Claire and Alan. They were not rotted corpses here. They were whole, pale as wax, their clothes dry and spotless. Claire's throat went dry. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was tall, dressed in a captain's uniform, his face solemn. "You've come," he said. His voice echoed strangely, as though from underwater. Claire tried to speak, but no sound came out. The captain looked past her, into the shadows. "It is time," he said. And then the passengers moved, all at once. They swarmed the sub. Hands reached through the glass as though it weren't there, cold and wet, grabbing at Claire's arms, her hair. Alan shouted, trying to push them away, but it was useless. Claire was pulled out of her seat, out of the sub, out into the ballroom that shouldn't exist. Her scream echoed into silence. The music started then, soft, ghostly, the sound of a piano playing a waltz. The passengers began to dance. Claire stumbled, trying to run, but the captain caught her wrist. "You wanted to know why there are no bones," he said softly. His grip was like iron. "Because we are still here." The passengers stopped dancing and turned to face her. One by one, they opened their mouths, and water poured out. Cold, dark, endless. Claire screamed as the water rushed toward her, pulling her under. The last thing she saw was Alan's face, pressed against the sub's porthole, his mouth forming her name, before everything went dark. Claire opened her eyes. She was lying on a floor that wasn't the floor of the submersible. It was carpet, soft, red, and dry. The air was warm. Music drifted faintly through the room, as if from a distant gramophone. She sat up slowly. The ballroom was empty. No passengers. No captain. No Alan. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice trembling. No answer. She stumbled through the massive room, past gilded columns and tables set with spotless china. The chandeliers above still glowed faintly, bathing everything in golden light. Then she saw the staircase. The grand staircase. She climbed it, her footsteps echoing in the silent hall. At the top, a row of photographs lined the wall. She froze. They were portraits of passengers. Hundreds of them, every face staring out at her. And there, near the end of the row, was her own photograph. Claire staggered back, her breath coming fast. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The ship creaked around her, a deep, mournful groan. A sudden crash echoed from below. Claire ran back down the stairs, and saw Alan. He was standing in the middle of the ballroom, drenched, wild-eyed. "Claire," he shouted. "We have to go, now." Before she could answer, the walls began to dissolve. The chandeliers flickered and went out. The warm carpet turned to wet steel beneath her feet. The water rushed back, flooding the room, swallowing everything. Alan grabbed her hand, dragging her toward a glowing shape, the submersible, still intact, its hatch wide open. Claire stumbled inside, coughing as water poured around them. Alan slammed the hatch shut and hit the emergency ascent. The sub shot upward, away from the wreck, away from the impossible ballroom. Through the porthole, Claire saw the Titanic fading into the darkness, but for a moment she thought she saw the captain standing on the deck, watching them rise. And smiling. When they broke the surface, the storm was gone. The sky was clear, the sea calm. The research vessel hauled them aboard. The crew swarmed around them, demanding answers, but Claire couldn't speak. She collapsed on the deck, gasping for air. Alan knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "We made it," he said. But his face looked wrong. Too pale. His eyes too dark. Claire recoiled. "Alan," she whispered. "You're not." He smiled. The same smile she had seen on the captain's face. Then he stood, turned to the crew, and said calmly, "It's time to finish the voyage." That night, Claire sat alone in her cabin, shivering. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. Her skin was pale, waxy. Her hair, still wet even hours later, clung to her face as though she'd just stepped out of the sea. A drop of water trickled down her cheek. But she hadn't been crying. On the desk lay a piece of paper. It hadn't been there before. She picked it up with shaking hands. It was a passenger manifest, a list of names. And there, written in neat, faded ink, was hers. Claire Whitman, third-class passenger. Dated April 10, 1912. The next morning, the research vessel was gone. No wreckage, no sign it had ever been there. Just open ocean, calm and endless. Somewhere below, the Titanic waited. And if you listen closely, even now, you can hear it. The faint sound of tapping. Calling someone new to come down.